Welcome for another podcast. With us we have Callum, who visited Afghanistan last year in a documentary on YouTube. Can I call it a documentary? It went extremely viral, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be a video just explaining, here's what you can find if you went there. It's called Tourism in Taliban-Controlled Afghanistan.
And it was a quite limited pool of people that have done similar video content from the country. So immediately when it came up on YouTube, you just saw the numbers shooting up. People were very interested in seeing how the country now looks like after the Taliban have taken control.
Yeah, they now have loads of anti-American stuff, obviously up. They're not fans. Like on the US Embassy now, there's a massive painting of the US flag and then a series of skulls at the bottom, just to get the message across to the locals about who's in power, I guess.
Sure. So not 51 stars, but
no.
or 50 stars.
Although it's a bit funny because they're all driving around in American equipment, you know, thanks to Joe Biden.
Sure.
So, they're like, we hate America, but you've got all American stuff.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
But on the other hand, that's how most of the world looks like these days. Even these, the iPhone communists, so to say, that protest in all capitals in the EU. We're against colonialism, we're against capitalism, and everything from Starbucks to the iPhones to, yeah. But
I love the idea of like some Starbucks communist running into a Taliban member and be like, "Oh, me too."
I mean, I think it's quite likely that they can actually meet during these protest marches that are taking place right now in various capitals across Western Europe and the US as well. There was actually a quite funny video with this man who was arguing with another man about whether children can go on puberty blockers or not. And then he looked for support among some young girls that were participating in this anti-Israel march. And the young girls said that they absolutely can't. It's forbidden according to all three Abrahamic religions. So, but going back to Afghanistan itself, how did it look like 1 year after the change of power over there? Because I'm guessing Kabul didn't really see any fighting, so I don't think there was any war destruction, so to say, to be seen.
As far as I'm aware, there were a lot of people who died at the airport, obviously, because of the circumstances. But the Taliban, mostly, I'm going to say mostly peaceful.
Yeah.
But they did take over the place.
Fiery, but a peaceful enter into Kabul, at least.
Yeah.
There was fighting, of course, in the south and in other parts of the country, but Kabul, as many other large cities, fell without a fight.
So since they've taken over, at least I wasn't there before. I hadn't been to the old regime's version of Afghanistan, with the US occupation and whatnot. I could only take on, from that era, the people I met who had been. And so there was Lord Miles, who was my guide, who had been at the fall. But then there were also a series of people who were frankly kind of mercenaries or working for the UN or various other things who were still working in country. And all they told me is that things have weirdly got better in a few ways. They've obviously got worse in other ways for people, women, who want to go to have an education, obviously, easily comes to mind. But one of the things that did change, at least, is when the West was no longer there, as they put it, people were far more respectful on the streets to Westerners. They didn't spit at you. They didn't feel like you were going to get stabbed by, you see people and they give you evil eyes looking at you. Why are you here? There's other aspects as well. Like, for example, there was these two people who were working on getting the dogs back. There's this lie that we got all the dogs out. We didn't.
Yeah.
And the dogs there still have the microchips. So obviously the people who are there were able to prove this belongs to us.
Yeah.
Well, the Taliban commander doesn't really care, does he? So he's arguing, no, this is ours. So what they'd have to do in the old days is just bribe them. And one day we're eating dinner at this camp I'm staying at, and the two people who are working at this charity to get the dogs back are sat there whining about how the Taliban aren't corrupt. Like, they don't take the bribes anymore. God damn, we can't do anything in this country anymore. It's like, okay. Yeah, so that's another change.
There are certainly changes. I think I saw some recent statistics over the extent of the poppy fields, the heroin production, and again, practically gone. But you also mentioned Lord Miles here, and I saw there were some messages out recently saying that he is back, that he is free. Is there any update to his situation? Because I don't think he left the country, right? But he was back online and saying that he was free, or has he left the country? I'm not sure.
For people who don't know Lord Miles, he was the guy who was there at the fall of Kabul, and then he's an absolute shit poster. So he became very famous overnight. Everyone loves him because he's too charismatic. And then he went and met the Taliban during the fall. And even they thought he was charismatic. Gets along with everyone.
Yeah.
And then he started going back to the Taliban-Controlled Afghanistan and made friends with like members of the cabinet. He just waltzed up and had tea with the Minister of Interior or whatever.
Yeah.
So I went with him, and then he went another time, and he was detained. And he was there for 8 months.
He was trying to. There is this little part of Afghanistan, you could say, it's like a small little arm that like sticks out towards China, and there is a small little piece of land that borders with China. And apparently, he was trying to cross there, which is one of the most inaccessible parts of the country, mountainous, rugged, and there radio silence for a couple of months, and then it turned out that he was being held, and there were some different stories about what actually happened. But what is the situation now?
So his trip that time actually was to set up a gold mine because there's money to be made, obviously new business opportunities with a new government. But one of the plans was to take on the corridor that goes to China. And as they were walking around, they ended up getting detained. I won't go into the full details. He was there for 8 months in Taliban custody. He is back. He's been back for a couple of weeks doing interviews, setting up his finances again, because obviously his whole life was turned upside down. And last I heard, he's going back to Afghanistan in a few days.
I see the...
Because why wouldn't you after being detained for 8 months?
The lust for adventure will never disappear with Lord Miles. But...
I don't know how much I can say, but he wasn't really held as a prisoner properly. So he ended up having like tea with members of the cabinet. Because obviously the people there who were holding him were just like, hey, that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
This guy's kind of funny. So he's agreed with them. Last I heard, they were actually offering him a helicopter to go and see the corridor. Yeah. Because no one's been there in like 70 years.
Yes, this is what I heard as well, that nobody has been able to cross it due to its very difficult terrain. But also in general, had you been to other parts of the world similar to Afghanistan, so to say, the deeper parts of Asia before, or this was the first time that you traveled to those regions?
This was my first time outside Europe. So, if you're going to go have a gap year, pick Afghanistan, why not?
So this is what piqued my curiosity here. What would you say would have been the culture shocks during your stay? How different is that part of the world compared to our countries here in Europe?
So it's the only properly Islamic country I've been to, so maybe I've got a skewed perspective. But Islamic law really matters there, of course, especially under the Taliban rule. So that was probably the biggest cultural shock, is all of a sudden music's banned. All of a sudden you've got to take religion very seriously. Do not blaspheme.
Yeah, no jokes.
Nothing. No one even cracks a smile if they can help it. And things like that. One of the worst experiences was, and this is apparently unique to sort of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, is we're hanging out and we get called over at a checkpoint, and this Canadian guy is there working for the Taliban. So obviously we get out of the car, we're like, can we interview you? Can we talk to you? Like, what the hell? Why did you join the Taliban? And we're making conversation with this guy because he speaks English. And the older guys who have been fighting the jihad for who knows how long, they come up and they're like muttering away in Pashto and looking at us. And our translator is just like, hey, lads, we're going. We got to go. And we're like, oh, thank you very much. We'll give you a call, I guess, Mr. Canadian Taliban, because we're just trying to be friendly. Yeah. Get back in the car, drive off. And our translator is driving us and just goes, they were talking about how beautiful you both were, which is code for...
They were interested in certain things.
Yeah, and that happened twice. That wasn't just that one instance. So that's probably the biggest one that made me feel quite sick.
Sure, this is a phenomenon that has a name, Bacha Bazi, or the dancing boys, as they call them as well. For the viewers that don't know, it's the phenomenon of dressing up young boys in dresses, having them dance, and then... sexually assaulting them, and apparently it is fairly common, unfortunately.
It used to be accepted under the US government, and is, I don't know how accepted now under the Taliban, but it exists. Apparently
it was a big problem that many Americans, they saw it, and they wanted to intervene, but at the same time, there were certain rules that if you would have done it, then you would have destroyed your relationship with the regional commander, and you could have put the lives of American troops in danger and so on. Apparently it was something that was a recurring problem, that many Americans wanted to intervene. Maybe in some cases it was possible, but I certainly heard many stories in which they simply had their hands tied and had to walk away simply.
Have you seen the Vice documentary? This is what winning looks like.
Yes.
So there's this beautiful scene in which there's this guy who's utterly destroyed, this US advisor who's trying to get them to stop. And you get a sense of just how broken the whole system was.
Yeah.
When he explains to them, this is illegal, you can't do this. The commander finally agrees to do some raids to try and free these boys. And then it just gets cancelled.
Yeah.
And he's told he's just got to live with it.
Well, they called it America's longest war because it did go on even longer than the Vietnam War. It was 20 years. And initially when the Americans came in, they came in with the idea that somehow they could democratize the country, they could introduce certain Western standards and so on. And maybe in some neighborhoods in Kabul, some skateboarding became prevalent, or there was, there was some very small, limited successes. But in general, it looks like the people were not interested at all in what the Americans had to offer.
For being there, I can't even remember what American culture I even saw. I mean, we found some My Little Pony stickers in some junk piles if you wanted to buy them, like patches that American soldiers had left. There are other ones that are like, this is what an angry black woman looks like, or something like that. You're just like, okay, this is what the Americans left, did they? I mean, well, there's a lot of like cringe culture. I remember they even put up a George Floyd painting in Kabul.
I remember, and it was immediately destroyed by the Taliban after they took over. And I think they even left a message next to it, some form of...
Well, you're not allowed idols, obviously. So.
Well, there we go. So, yeah.
But speaking of the democracy thing, I mean, I can't speak for all Afghans or what their opinions were. But one of the guys I met there, I was asking him, so the mission was to democratize and westernize Afghanistan. What happened? And he says, no one believes in any of that. And he explained to me they had one election. It took a year to count the votes. Yeah. So when that's your experience of democracy, no wonder they didn't care.
Yeah, it complicates things, clearly. But also in Afghanistan, there is this code. I mean, the country is extremely multi-ethnic, but the largest group is the Pashtuns. And the Pashtuns, they have this ancient code of conduct called the Pashtunwali, or the way of the Pashtuns. And one of its most important components is how you treat a guest. And since you were a guest in the country, and I'm assuming you met many Pashtuns, did you feel this hospitality towards guests?
It's weird to talk about the positive aspects of the Taliban so much, but it does exist. Obviously, they're human beings. Yeah. This is why I like traveling, because no matter how weird individual you meet or extreme in their beliefs, you'll find they're very human. And we can find this, as you're mentioning, with Pashtunwali, where for example, basically anywhere we'd go where you'd run into Pashtun Taliban, they would offer you tea and be like, no, come sit down, but it's fine. Like, try and take care of you. Even though obviously you're a Westerner, you're not exactly their favorite person. Even if it's just, I suppose, as a curiosity, but the compassion thing of we want to take care of our guests is definitely real. I even got warned. There was an advisor of mine who took part in one of the British operations in Afghanistan. And he said to me, whatever happens, just try and refuse food if you can, because they'll even offer you like the last piece of bread they've got when they're starving. Yeah. And yeah, definitely Afghanistan has got some positive cultural aspects in that regard. And it's kind of humbling sometimes.
Do you think that you would go back anytime soon, or now that you've seen it, you have other parts of the world that you want to visit next instead?
I'd love to go back, to be honest. I even got interviewed by someone on the Times who'd called up a bunch of people who had been since the new government, and everyone said no. And he called me. I was like, yeah, why not? He just got angry on the phone. It was like, because they're terrible and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, okay, countries have got their downsides. But there is something mythical about Afghanistan. The risk of sounding like a hippie from the 60s, sincerely, there is something magical about that place that just makes you happy and spiritual. And I'm not a spiritual person. And everyone I've spoken to who even went there and fought has something similar like that. So I can't be the only one.
Well, they do have the reputation as the graveyard of empires, is one famous way that the country is described. Extremely mountainous. The people are extremely fierce when it comes to fighting, and they certainly value their independence against various types of colonial or imperial powers. So it is a country that certainly in the coming years we will all have to keep our eyes on. It also plays an important role in the general Muslim world as one of the few countries that is ruled by a theocratic political elite, the other naturally being Iran, which is the clear one. The Saudis, even if they are on good relations with the local Wahhabi religious elite, it's still a royal family that controls the country, so it's not really the same thing. It is something that we'll have to watch. Thank you very much, Callum, for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.